In this bag is a bunch of expired food. Even though it looked and smelled fine, I need to throw it out, right? Well, maybe not. It turns out that expired food might actually be perfectly safe to eat, and that expiration dates are a confusing and misleading mess that is causing us to waste tons of food and money every single year. And the deeper you look into it, the more you realize that we're all wrong about best before dates. So today, I want to learn as much as I can to help you save money and keep your food for a little bit longer. This question came to me when I was cleaning out my kitchen last month. I was going through my food and I found that a lot of it had expired and that I had to throw it out. For a lot of the supposedly expired food though, I kept thinking, this looks no different than it did before. And to be honest, this happens more often than I'd care to admit. Buying in large quantities is significantly cheaper, and I buy food for myself and myself only, so a lot of it doesn't get eaten in time. No matter what I've done, more food ends up in the garbage than I want. But later that evening, I got thinking. When I pulled out peppers to cook dinner, I couldn't find an expiration date anywhere. And it was the same for all the other veggies I had in my fridge. What's the point of expiration dates if they're not on the food that goes bad the fastest? And once I started researching, I found out that I wasn't alone. Across the US, every household throws out around $1,300 of food every year. And seeing how much food that adds up to is honestly mind-boggling. To give you an idea, since the start of this video, around 506,000 pounds of food has been thrown out, which would fill 101 dumpsters in a couple minutes. To make matters worse, the FDA found that around 20% of this food waste comes from expired food. Now, a ton of studies have been done by Harvard, and they found that, like me, most Americans blindly trust in expiration dates. But most companies set these dates arbitrarily based on their own rules. So that begs an important question. Why do expiration dates even exist? To find that answer, we have to travel to a date before best before dates. Rolling back to the early days of America, households grew and produced their own food. There was no Costco or Kroger, and definitely no Erewhon. And it was up to you to figure out if your food was safe to eat, which honestly is pretty easy. Rotten food makes itself obvious. It usually looks, smells, or even tastes bad once it's gone rotten. But fast forward to the late 1800s, and industrialization was on the rise. New tools and technology were allowing a smaller number of farmers to produce a lot more food, which enabled us to move into cities, develop other industries, and still feed our growing population. Except, on the other hand, this also created a disconnect between food producers and the end consumer, which was only worsened after World War II, when we stopped buying food at small markets and shops and started buying from one-stop shop supermarkets. These stores were the new American dream, but they also made it way harder to figure out where your food was coming from and how fresh it was. Enter Al Capone, the mobster who dominated the alcohol trade in the Prohibition, that Al Capone. Rumor has it that in the 30s, someone in his family got sick from bad milk. And because he had a big influence on the dairy industry, he took action, petitioning Big Milk to put expiry dates on their bottles. Alright, I'm not gonna lie, this story is nothing more than a rumor, but it does show us how ambiguous food dating really is. Sometime in the 50s, food manufacturers decided they could help clear this up by putting date codes on their packaging to help stores rotate the food off the shelf before it went bad. Now this helped for a while. It made sure that people weren't getting food right before it was about to expire. But come the 70s, consumers wanted that same transparency. They wanted to make sure they were buying the freshest food they could. So manufacturers saw their opportunity again. They switched from date codes to clear date labels with a specific date that their food would go bad. This got more customers buying because it showed off the freshness of their food. So that's it, right? Case closed. From that point on, government regulations kicked in and we all lived happily ever after. Yeah, not at all. You probably expected that there was some government regulation for these expiry dates, right? But no, The only items that are federally mandated to have expiration dates are prescription drugs and baby formula. And those dates are only designed to guarantee that the active ingredients are still effective. Beyond that, there's some industry and state regulations, but nothing standard across the country. The majority of expiration dates are made at random, and they're also fully misleading. Studies going back as far as 1979 have shown that they do a bad job of tracking food freshness. So, let's take a closer look at what these date labels even mean. First things first, the elephant in the room. Every label has different wording with different meanings. You'll see best before or best if used by, which means that the product is in its prime until that date. Sell by, which is the recommended date that a store should sell the food by for ideal freshness. Use by, which is the time that the food should be eaten before it starts losing quality. And freeze by, which is the day you should freeze the food if it hasn't already been eaten. You might notice that none of these tell you when the food is about to go rotten. So knowing that, I think we need to figure out how these companies come up with the dates in the first place. For the larger players in the industry, they'll get a sample of the food and measure the bacteria levels on day 1. Then they store the food, matching conditions it would experience in transport, storage, the store, and in a home. Throughout that time, they take regular measurements for harmful bacteria that would make the food unsafe. Once it reaches that level where it gets unsafe, they keep that date on hand, and then set their expiration date days or weeks before that happens. That, my friends, is exactly why these date labels are so misleading. Food producers want to make sure you never come close to eating rotten food, because if you do, you'll avoid buying from them again, you'll hold onto the food for longer than you need, and in the land of the lawsuit, you could potentially sue. So rather than being an expiration date, these are more of a quality guarantee, designed to get you to throw the food out way before it goes rotten. But because of that confusion, billions of pounds of food is wasted every single year. So I guess we should figure out how much longer you really have after the expiration date hits. Well, a few studies have tested this across a wide range of products, and it turns out that your food is probably fine way after the best before date. For some items, like dairy, poultry, and other meats, you usually only get a few extra days max. But other food, like eggs, can last weeks beyond the expiration date. And dry products, like pasta, cereal, and crackers, can last for years beyond the expiration date. So should we just be keeping our food for longer? Is that the answer we've been looking for? Remember, 80 million tons of perfectly good food goes uneaten every year. A decent chunk of that coming from misleading expiration dates, which cause people to throw out food that could still be good. But stores also throw out expired food because customers won't buy it. I think this problem is bigger than just our individual actions. And the pressure grows, knowing that 1 in 8 Americans live with food insecurity. In other words, 44 million people across the country have unreliable access to healthy, good food. So this is a tricky one. Let's try and take a look at some of the solutions. My initial thought was there has to be a way to get some of this expired food that's really still good into the hands of people who need it. But that argument fell apart when I thought a bit deeper. If we wouldn't eat the expired food, why should someone else have to be given it? And the stores follow that same logic. But there is hope that this food can get saved. Feeding America has a program designed to rescue food from ending up in the landfill. With this program, they collect the food from stores, restaurants, and farmers that would normally end up being wasted because it's about to expire, it's malformed, or was damaged in transport, and they inspect that food, guaranteeing it's safe to consume before passing it on to someone who may not have reliable access to food. To me, it's the best of both worlds. You get that food into the hands of people who need it while still making sure it's not going to be harmful. With that in mind, I left a link down below to Feeding America if you do want to help them provide meals for those who need them. But what about us? How can we do our part to cut down on food waste? The USDA recommends trusting your instincts. If food is expired, but it still looks good, check another layer deeper. If the food is really unsafe for you to eat, it will almost always look or smell off. On top of that, they recommend freezing food that you know you can't eat in time to prevent wasting it, and ensuring that you're storing everything properly to maximize its lifespan. But of course, there's one more thing we can do to cut down on food waste: making these labels less confusing. Quite frankly put, businesses have no incentive to make any change. They won't make more money by clarifying their expiration dates. If anything, they'll probably lose money. But the FDA could absolutely regulate the meaning, the wording, and the process for coming up with these dates. And that alone would help a ton in cutting down food waste. Last year, the Food Date Labeling Act was brought to the Senate. This bill outlined how food producers could move from best before dates to quality dates and discard dates, differentiating between when food needs to be thrown out and when it starts losing quality. Even though this act was read twice in the Senate, it never amounted to anything. And here we remain, wasting copious amounts of food while our own neighbors go hungry. Food expiration dates are, without a doubt, misleading. But I don't think it's a lost cause. I'm gonna do my part in cutting down on the food I throw out and look forward to a future where these dates become a little bit more transparent. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that we could use a little bit more transparency about the food we're eating. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you're probably gonna like the other content that I'm working on, so be sure to subscribe down below and turn on notifications. Once you're done, check out this video I made here about fast food addiction and the impact on Americans. See you next week.